There's still about 10 students, the ones that usually come in a little bit later. I'm going to undertake a high-risk operation here of assuming that by the time I get to the spot where I'm going to put one of these up, the cord will have arrived to make it work. Okay? Now, in the last class that we had on Tuesday, I introduced to you the whole concept of worldviews, in the context of which the natural law worldview exists. And I explained to you the general context of worldviews as those are set forth by Professor Talcott Parsons, who originated the left-right political bar graph, and Dr. Ralph Potter, who is the chair of the Department of Comparative Social Ethics at Harvard. This is their particular take on the schematic for worldviews. And it's the larger context, as I said, in which the natural law worldview arises and stands. And so what I want to do today in the class prior to the time that you get the opportunity to write your first essay, and I know you've all been kind of, pulling at the bit here to get to do that. You're just straining to want to get in front of us all what your ideas are about this natural law worldview. And I've suggested that what I want you to do in the first essay is really just to articulate for me what your understanding is of this natural law worldview. And as I pointed out, one of the characteristics of this natural law worldview is the fact that it has gone through a period of different iterations where advocates and proponents of the natural law worldview have taken a slightly different view of exactly what that means. And I outlined for you on Tuesday what half a dozen of those are, so that you can either check your notes on that or go back and check on the e-commons or wherever it is that the videos of this are that you get. You can just check those again. But I'm not asking you to have to go rehash what all the different variations of it are. But what I want you to do is I want you to take a look at those and just give me your ideas about what you view to be the viability of the natural law worldview, in which particular iteration of it you find the most appealing. If in fact you find none of them appealing, and you're part of the postmodern community that views it all as a load of crap, you can say that, but make sure you take 5 pages to say that rather than one paragraph, and explain to me what it is that you think is wrong with the natural law worldview. What I want to do today, prior to asking for your papers on Tuesday, and those will be due at the beginning of class on Tuesday, along with your photograph, the one that you've been constantly trying to remember bringing in. What I want you to do is I want you to attach your photograph to the paper, not because I'm going to be looking at your paper and the photograph at the same time. Just this way I know you're going to give it to me, because it'll be a 2-point deduction for lack of participation in the class if you don't give me your photograph, because then I won't be able to call on you, or else I'll have to go get special detectives to find out who you are and then call on you all the time if I don't have your photograph. But as I say, today what I want to do is I want to do 2 things. I want to finish fleshing in the larger context in which this natural law worldview stands. And then I want to focus on that actual natural law worldview in the overall schematic, so that we can start drilling down on it in our preparation to begin the actual discussion of the American Constitution and how natural law influenced it and how it manifests in different portions of the Constitution. I think I still don't have the cord to make this thing go. Any minute now. Okay. Now the bottom line is that I pointed out to you last time the 4 pillar questions that are the kind of most profound cosmic level questions that every person has to answer for herself or himself, at least unconsciously, as a larger context, in the context of which you make ethical decisions about what you should do in a given circumstance, given the rest of reality, the way you perceive it to be. Now, there are an awful lot of subsets of these larger concepts. You know, getting all the way down to what you think your neighborhood thinks and what your family thinks, and you know what your boyfriend or girlfriend thinks before you do something. But these are the larger scale fundamental questions, as I pointed out. And this has been developed by Dr. Ralph Potter, bless you. Dr. Ralph Potter at Harvard University has laid out what they call Potter's box. And that just makes it easy to remember. It's like a four-square that they work with, and that the first fundamental pillar question was the answer to the cosmological question of how the universe and all of this that we see all the time and hear, how it came into existence. And the second pillar question is the teleological question as to how this is actually unfolding. This entire manifest reality, how is it moving in any particular direction? Is it moving towards some ultimate final condition that could be used as a referent for either right or wrong, that this is better or worse, that it's going in that direction? The third pillar question being the basic ontological question, and that is, how did consciousness come into existence? More pointedly, from your point of view, is how did your consciousness come into existence? How did you end up being here, riding around behind your eyeballs? The fourth fundamental pillar question was the epistemological question, and that is, what are the means that we as human beings have at our disposal by means of which we can answer cosmic questions of that scale? Okay? And then I pointed out that if in fact one is a systematic thinker and actually provides an answer to each of those four kind of cosmic questions, the three of which other answers are consistent with each of your other answers, so that they're, as we say, internally and self-referentially consistent answers to those four questions, it will generate a principle, an underlying principle. Yes?
Can you give an example of an inconsistent set of beliefs for the sake of clarity?
Sure.
Why those wouldn't be valid?
Yeah, sure. For example, if in fact one thought that ontologically you came into existence, your consciousness came into existence because you were created by God to know, love, and serve her. Or him, as they say in the catechism classes, and that therefore you were created, this consciousness was created, and it only exists once, and it only exists for this period of 70 to 100 years, and you had that particular belief that you were created by this infinite spiritual being, and yet the entire universe was just going to crap, and it was just going to disintegrate into nothing, and that was it. That would be inconsistent. There would be no purpose for a being of that kind to manifest an individuated consciousness. There's no purpose in that. There's no motive possibly that the consciousness would have to do that. It doesn't fit. That's what I'm saying. So it's you can answer any one of those four questions any way you choose to. But the fact of the matter is, when they are not self-referentially consistent answers, what you get is, in effect, a cacophony. You get this kind of cacophonic effect in that you end up being confused most of the time. And you can't figure out how to consistently answer questions. And that becomes a problem. I'm just reviewing this quickly for us so that we can get into the larger context of this as soon as the chord comes. That principle that is generated by the answer, the consistent answer that you provide to all of these questions, it itself is a principle that in fact, if you follow that principle in answering major challenges that confront you, it will in fact become a mode of ethical reasoning. it provides a mode of ethical reasoning pursuant to which you can answer questions. For example, if in fact you're an adherent to the first paradigm worldview and your mode of ethical reasoning is immediate self-gratification in the maximization of your pleasure and the minimalization of your pain, the kind of classic worldview, then in fact you will, when confronted with these options, you'll seek that option that generates the greatest amount of personal pleasure for you. Self-interest, selfishness, getting the biggest piece. Or like the Lakota people refer to white people as wachichus, which is he who always takes the bigger piece. It was kind of an insight they had with regard to the Caucasians. But that is a first paradigm mode of ethical reasoning. If, for example, however, you're in a sixth paradigm worldview, and you believe that, for example, every single ethical choice that you make, you ought to make the choice that generates the greatest good for the seventh generation removed from our present generation, and you're thinking in those terms, then you're making usually a different choice among the options that have been provided to you. And so now I'm getting in I know if we turn that thing on, will it shine above?
Well, then you lose the room.
I lose the room mic. Okay. Who is it that has this mysterious cord?
Kim, she'll be back.
Kim. Any second. Okay. So the bottom line is that I held up for you to the light last time. This is Potter's box that I held up. You'll all remember this. This is now calling on your memory, your imagination. You remember the Potter's box that had the cosmology and the teleology and the ontology and the epistemology. And then I held up for you the mode of ethical reasoning that is generated by your answers to this. And I pointed out that the mode of ethical reasoning, when applied to a lot of the basic questions that any human being will face during her or his life, if you answer those pursuant to that principle, you will in fact have a thoroughgoing philosophy. And I pointed out that that philosophy will in turn generate a political philosophy, which is derivative of that particular philosophy. And I laid out for you the classic right-left political spectrum that runs all the way from on the extreme right to, from authoritarianism, or what in fact Talcott Parsons referred to as the right systematist worldview, to the other side, which is the left systematist worldview, which is the utopian worldview. And then there is the right marginalist worldview, which is in fact the reactionary worldview. And then there's the left marginalist worldview, which is the progressive worldview. And then Talcott Parsons had the middle marginalist worldview, which is the classic scientific, logical, positivist, moderate worldview. And I pointed out for you that in the master's thesis work that I was doing, that I ended up arguing successfully with the professor that there was also a conservative and liberal worldview that were in fact generic worldviews, distinct from the others, and that they fit into the spectrum of having 7 full worldviews. And of course that gave rise to, I was waiting for one of you to jump up and say, well, isn't it logical, given the chakra system, that there would be an 8th worldview to finish the octave, because of the existence, as all the major adepts point out, that there is in fact an 8th chakra that abides high above the head. Not just the crown chakra is the final one, but there's an 8th chakra that abides above the head, and that therefore there would be a reasonable presumption that there are in fact 8 faculties that our human species has latent within us. And that this 6th sense that's evolving right now, our 6th sense from the 6th chakra, which is the ESP and telecommunications chakra, the telepathic chakra, that there would be a full set of 8 of these. Okay, and so what it is what I want to do is I want to point out now that that here are those that I set forth for you yesterday. The right systematist and right marginalist, and left systematist and left marginalist, and left middle marginalist and right middle marginalist, and middle marginalist. These are your classic authoritarian, reactionary, conservative, moderate, liberal, progressive, and utopian worldviews. Now, what I want to point out today, just in progressing along this line, I want to point out that this particular group, when you drop this down in the context of what we were talking about, in the context of this major schematic here, that under the philosophy there is a political philosophy and these are they. This is what the basic political philosophies look like when you set them forth and you correlate them with the classic vibrational frequencies that are referred to in the chakra system that I pointed out to you. You get the red right systematist authoritarian worldview, the orange reactionary worldview, the yellow worldview, which you can't see very well here, but it's the classic conservative worldview, and then the green moderate worldview, and this is a blue liberal worldview, the indigo, and the violet. That's a classic starting to correlate. This goes on to the misinterpretation I had of your question, Tyler, is what does this really mean? Is there some sort of underlying phenomenological causation that's actually causing people to gravitate toward one worldview or another? And all of this, as I said, was a misinterpretation of your question. I started answering it that way because this is basically what I wanted to talk about, despite your question the other day. And so this is what the subset of the political philosophies look like. And the larger context in which this fits is this one. This is when you have up above you have the answers to the 4 major pillar questions that generate your principle, that generate your mode of ethical reasoning. At the top, the mode of ethical reasoning, as I said, generates your philosophy. Your philosophy generates your political philosophy. Here are the classic subdivisions of the political philosophies. But in addition to generating a philosophy and a political philosophy, it also generates a particular theory of human psychology, the worldview that you have. It also generates a particular mode of spiritual expression. And it also generates a particular mode of economic development. And it also generates a particular social form to your society that is predicated upon a shared worldview. And ultimately, it affects your art and music and your form of dance. That your art forms are all derivative of the worldview that is shared by a given culture. So that this is the larger context within which the political philosophies fall. And each one of these, that you might have this recognition now, that if you were to cut into any one of these things, you would discover that there's an octave of manifestations of each of these, that there's an entire octave of theories of human psychology. You know that there's a difference between Freudian psychology and Jungian psychology and Gestalt psychology there, but no one ever explains to you what it is that makes sense about all those different positions, other than the fact that there's just a whole bunch of intellectuals arguing with each other. The reality of it is that these systematic positions that are taken on these matters, such as philosophy and political philosophy and theory of human psychology, they are in fact derivative of the worldview. And those are all generated by the answers that are provided to those 4 pillar questions. And so that what you'll see is you start getting into even more revealing positions when you understand, for your philosophy majors, is that here you start to discover that the basic, philosophical positions. What's that? I've got to get it right side up here. Oh, I said I did. I wrote them sideways. But here they are here. If you move from right to left in your philosophies, you get Epicurus, and a fellow you probably haven't heard as much about is Calisius. That these were two ancient Greek philosophers that believed that all there was simple material reality, and that there was no discernible pattern or rational system functioning, and so that might makes right. Calculus is the guy that first asserted the proposition that might makes right, and it's the mere assertion of physical power and dominance is what controls and sets up the order of any culture. And you have Hegelian dialectics in the classic second paradigm worldview. Now these would be falling like this on the political spectrum, you'll see. And so that you have Hegel here, you have your third paradigm worldview, which is your existentialists. That here you have Kierkegaard and Sartre and the others. You have in your middle marginalist worldview, you have your classic majoritarian utilitarians. You have John Stuart Mill, you have Jeremy Bentham, the classics that you'll have here. That these are scientific rational positivists. And then you move over to the liberal worldview, and you get the classic Plato. You get Plato and Socrates, and you get John Rawls, his latest pass at liberal philosophy. And you get to the sixth paradigm worldview, the progressive radical monist worldview that we're going to go into some depth on, and you get Pythagoras. Pythagoras is the one who not only developed a full-scale, comprehensive understanding of how it is that the universe geometrically manifests and relates to itself internally, but in fact had an entire school of religion. The Pythagoreans. It was an entire community that lived together, were vegetarians, were celibate, the whole 9 yards. But that's the major philosophy here. And then you get into the seventh paradigm, and you have the Stoics and the pre-Socratics. Okay, so that yes.
Well, so like you were talking about before in the previous lectures, you were talking about like how postmodernism is kind of the language that we use all the time, especially in Santa Cruz.
Yeah.
But so would you put them with Kierkegaard and stuff? Like is it like masking itself as like a sort of progressive, if even like utopian view, but it's really like a conservative, like stuff falls like conservative?
We don't have the mic up here, so let me repeat. The question is, in effect, is where do the postmodernists actually fall? Postmodernism is a recognition that because one is unable to provide definitive answers to any one of the four major pillar questions, they take the position that basically that because adherents to these worldviews postulate rather arbitrarily answers to those still unanswerable questions, that basically that undertaking, that process of developing an entire philosophy and political philosophy predicated upon a certain set of hypothetical answers to those questions causes more trouble than it solves. And that what it does is, while attempting to lend a certain kind of coherence and order to the world, what it does is ends up relying upon coercion and in imposing moral obligations on people that they may not necessarily naturally agree with. And so that the postmodernists say, in a fit of pseudo-liberalism, what they say is, look, let's not endorse any of those things. Let's in fact hold off and not endorse any of those things. And what they tend to be, if you had to pick one of these, they tend to be in the middle. They tend to be these majoritarian utilitarians. What they're saying is that until such time as we have a definitive answer for one or two or all of those four major pillar questions, we should not get in the business of constructing a particular mode of ethical reasoning predicated upon a set of hypothetical answers, because they always end up causing trouble, especially to the people who don't agree with those hypothetical answers. And so they tend to be in this middle area here of scientific logical positivists. Now, the shortcoming of that particular school of thought, of course, is that they can't acknowledge the veracity of anything unless they can weigh it and measure it and prove it and repeat the proof over and over again. So there's a whole dimension of reality, or indeed probably many dimensions of reality, that they do not give any recognition to whatsoever. And even though there's kind of disparate information and evidence all around indicating that something else is going on, like ESP or psychokinetics or you know, a precognition, all those kind of things, they just say, well, look, that hasn't been scientifically proven yet, so I'm not listening. I'm not listening, I'm not watching, I'm not going to do that. And moreover, if you try to, I'm going to spend my time knocking you down, because I'm going to be able to eventually point out that your entire philosophy or analysis is predicated upon certain hypothetical answers to those questions that you cannot, in fact, prove. Okay, Sophia.
Okay. So what?
Yes?
So I guess what I was wondering is, first of all, regarding postmodernism, but I've seen many postmodern critiques of science, especially coming from the field of critical theory. I've seen a lot more critiques of the scientific method, so they don't exactly seem to view science in the same way that moderates do, which you said is a stereotypical scientific methodical worldview. So that's a little bit confusing to me. The other thing is that the entire idea of the universe being aimless and gradually spiraling into chaos, I can see the gradually spiraling into chaos thing as being a pillar of the authoritarian or conservative or reactionary worldviews, but in principle, isn't it usually people who hold those worldviews who are most convinced of some kind of a larger religious narrative, say? Because most reactionaries I've met have been deeply religious people, and so they don't technically fit within this worldview.
Actually, the ones you've met were not religious people. What they are is fundamentalists. They're dialecticians. They're adherents to the second paradigm worldview. They believe that there's good guys and bad guys. That's all there is. There's Satan and there's God. There's white people and black people, or more to the point, white people and all the rest of the people. They're dialecticians. They're fundamental dialecticians. They're not, in fact, genuinely religious people. In the fact that they can quote to you whole chapters and verses out of the Bible, or the Koran for that matter, doesn't make them religious. Because they, in fact, are not actually kind to other people. They aren't genuinely forthcoming and spiritual to other people. They are, in fact, part of a war. And it doesn't take much to just nudge them a little bit, and they'll start doing war talk about how they have to vanquish and crush Satan. You know, crush Satan beneath your feet, and they're constantly engaged in that type of a dialectic. So that's just Tyler.
So, I mean, doesn't this system set up a means by which we can determine who's better or worse? How is that not dialectized?
Well, no. What it's doing is it is in fact a spectrum. It's a spectrum, but given the fact that you cannot answer any one of those four pillar questions definitively, you're not in a position to say that people who answer them in a way that's completely systematic, such as Plato did, is better than Kierkegaard or Hegel, because you'd have to be able to postulate an answer, a definitive answer to those.
Yes, but doesn't this system then postulate an answer by which we can rate or put people in their proper places?
But you can put them in their relative places. You can put them in their relative places, but that isn't relative to an absolutely correct answer.
But I mean, this whole methodology is based on some form of a methodology.
Yes.
So it already presupposes a certain accuracy to its method. And so in that way, it does impose a form of action on anyone who would follow it.
No, for example, all it's postulating is this, is that If in fact you find a person who, for example, is a fundamentalist Christian or a fundamentalist Islamicist or a fundamentalist anything, what you can do is you can ask them a whole series of 100 different questions, and you can predict 95 of what those answers are going to be, because they're going to answer these things in a consistent way that is rooted in at least an unconscious assumption about these 4 fundamental questions. And that's all that it says to you. And so that what this is designed for is actually basically being able to identify different worldviews, so that when you're engaged in a process of trying to put together some kind of a coalition to actually address a given public policy problem, you can understand what it is people who are adherents to a particular worldview are going to assert.
But in the process of identifying these particular worldviews,
yes,
how does that not impose the one worldview which would identify them on the people that are now identified?
Okay, because what I'm saying is that this is not a worldview itself.
But I mean, if it's based on a methodology that's like, I mean, saying that it purports to identify all of the other worldviews,
yes,
how would it claim to not be a worldview at the same time? Because it looks at the world and it says the world is a certain way.
What it's saying is that people can be observed to function in a particular way. But that's just, for example, like by saying that in fact, if you drop a ball off of a building, it'll hit the ground, doesn't mean that you've actually postulated an entire worldview. What it's doing is trying to develop predictive methodologies that are able to predict not who's right or wrong, or who's better or best.
That projects a worldview that, well, essentially human organization or like human morality is essentially the equivalent to a physical law.
Oh, now you're getting down to it. Now you're getting down to it. That much is true of what you said. Is that what this is doing is it's trying to provide some type of a phenomenological predicate for value judgments of what is good or bad. That's true. And in that sense, it could in fact, I guess, be characterized as a phenomenology. It's phenomenological. That's what this is. It's a phenomenological worldview, but in a sense, it's very difficult not to have certain type of phenomenological presumptions, or else you basically can't get up out of bed in the morning. You know, and so that there is no doubt that this particular methodology is designed for a purpose, which has to do with human community, with people gathering and sharing views and trying to figure out how to work together in a way that can get to a solution, a commonly accepted solution, which there isn't some particular group that is so completely out of joint about what the proposed solution is that they're going to revolt and fight you.
So this would be like the worldview that claims to coherently answer all 4 of the prime.
No. Take it easy. No. This isn't. You'll notice that in laying this out, I haven't taken any position as to what the correct answer is to any one of those 4 pillar questions.
Well, that's precisely what I'm saying. Is that by basing by basing an evaluation of people based off of observing their responses to the 4 questions, you've already presumed a methodology and thus reversely gone through every one of those squares from epistemology backwards.
No, that's not true. All that you're saying is that from an observational perspective, you can, in fact, if you discover over and over and over and over again that if you go from one community to another community to another community, and they're faced with a given set of public policy problems, they will almost always uniformly break down into the same groupings, that they will tend to cohere into particular groupings. No, let me finish. And that what this is saying is that if in fact you observe that to be true, in a sense, phenomenologically, you see that this happens all the time, You know, that whether you're sitting on a student council and there's always these cliques that develop, you know, and that you can always tell that they're going to oppose anything that you're proposing, and they're going to do it from a certain perspective. What this is attempting to do from the world of political science is an attempt to actually develop a scientific explanation of politics. That's what this is. Okay? Sophia, let me move on a couple other things, because we have a whole discussion session that's going to be following this. So I want you to put down your questions. Don't give up on them. Okay? But I want to point something. I want to get to a more controversial aspect of this, and that is that you'll notice that one of the particular manifestations of the worldviews that we were talking about here is in fact the mode of spiritual expression. You see that right down here, that there's a particular mode of spiritual expression that is generic to each of these different worldviews. And so what you begin to do is you begin to understand finally why it is that you get this type of a spread of religions in the world. If they're all talking about basically the same kind of thing, why is it they don't agree? And what you're getting here is you're getting a spread of different fundamental religious perspectives. Now remember, religion, relegare, the Latin root of religion, relegare, is to re-link. And what you see happening here, without getting too far ahead of ourselves, is atheistic materialists is the sort of the religion, if you will, of the right-wing authoritarians, that they in fact experience themselves. All of this entire phenomenon, political phenomenon, has to do with how we as human beings have conducted ourselves subsequent to the development of the intellect. All right? That, you know, and we don't want to get into great depth on this point, but you go all the way back to Australopithecus in the evolution of the human brain, and you get to that place between Australopithecus and Homo erectus where you actually have the human brain developing to the point where human beings become self-reflective, that we become self-conscious. We come to reflect upon ourselves as a nodule of consciousness, and that we begin to compute out from ourselves relationships with other material things in the world. And we set up this kind of bipolar relationship between ourselves and the rest of the world. And that what happens is that there is as you might guess from the word intellect, and as I mentioned the other day, the Latin root for intellect is intellectus, which is the ability to distinguish the difference between. And so that with the onset of the development of the intellect in the human species, our human species, we began to perceive ourselves as separate and apart from the entire rest of the created universe. That each one of us experiences ourselves like that initially, and that the collective community perceives ourselves as separate and apart from the rest of created nature, to the point where you have all kinds of didactic declarations on the part of the human family about how we are inherently born to dominate and control the world, that we're in charge of the world, that we're here, it's here for our purposes, etc. And what happens is that the religion, or relegare, the relinking process for the first paradigm adherents is not very well developed. That they haven't really relinked back into the universe. They feel alienated and separated from the rest of the universe. And so therefore, the only way to address that anxiety that they have is to attempt to assert dominion and power and control over everything around them. And so that you get a certain type of personality, a certain type of authoritarian personality that asserts power and dominion over others all around them. And the political form that develops around that is in fact a community that in fact looks to a particular person who is asserting power and dominion over everyone to be that person that provides a consistent set of rules and regulations, even if in fact they turn out to be motivated primarily by self-interest on the part of that particular potentate, which, as we know, tends to happen fairly regularly. That does tend to happen regularly. So what we see here is that there, in the same sense, that the larger context in which this natural law worldview occurs or arises, that I've spoken of, that this particular point in it that we're talking about here is this mode of spiritual expression that is derivative of the mode of ethical reasoning all the way down through, and that this particular mode of spiritual expression asserts itself in the second paradigm worldview in the form of fundamentalism. And that's why it's safe to say that a fundamentalist Islamicist is more like a fundamentalist Christian than the average regular Christian is to the average Islamicist. That the fundamentalist, whether they're Catholic fundamentalists that are part of the Inquisition, that are going around roasting everybody at the stake who doesn't agree with them, or a right-wing fundamentalist that's into condemning everybody to hell if they haven't joined their church, or a radical fundamentalist Islamicist who's ready to cut off the heads of any one of the students at the school that they raided this last month, who isn't a believer in Islam. And anybody who's a Christian, they'll cut their head off and kill them. This type of radical fundamentalism is in fact a subset, as you might guess, of the dialectic, of their discernment that in fact there is this fundamental underlying dialectic functioning in the universe, and they have to get on one side of this in order to lend meaning to their life. And so I point these things out to you just so that you'll understand that the context of the reason why we're going to be studying this particular worldview, because it falls into this particular schematic in Western civilization, in that the governors in Western civilization tend to be operating off from this particular schematic. That's what I'm sharing with you. And so that this particular political philosophy that we're going to be focusing on, this political philosophy right here, which is the natural law worldview, the sixth paradigm worldview, resides in this much larger context. So what I'm getting ready to talk with you about the natural law worldview and the theory of natural law is only one of the octave of political philosophies that resides within the whole full set of ethical reasoning and philosophy and theories of human psychology, etc. It is just one factor in the midst of all of those. The reason that I want to devote an entire course to focusing on it is because of the primacy that this particular theory, this political philosophy, has for our Constitution. And as I pointed out before, the reason that I want to talk about this is because the natural law worldview or natural law philosophy plays a profound and fundamental and central role in not only understanding the Constitution, but in interpreting the Constitution. Wherever there are vague aspects of it, or open-ended aspects, that your resort to the natural law theory is going to be of assistance to you in consistently developing further and deeper understandings of the constitutional principles so that you can argue on behalf of those. And again, I point out that the reason why I think that it's so important for you to understand that is because of the central role that is going to be played by the Constitution in being able to provide a source of protection for you during the upcoming crises that we're going to be confronting. And these ancillary problems, like the fact that ISIS is killing people in the Middle East, or that we've invaded the Middle East and are trying to occupy the oil fields, or the fact that the Russians have retaken part of the Ukraine, these are all fairly temporary scuffles. But there are strategic challenges that are arising, that I've touched on early on in the first 2 lectures. That this onset of major global climate change and the potential of inundating all the coastlines of the entire world, where 40 to 50% of the people live, and it'll be over 60% of the people by 2020 will live within 10 miles of the seacoasts of the world. And that the rising sea levels due to the global climate change, and potentially even the dissolution of the underwater sea currents that actually cause the temperate zone of the planet, where some 60 to 70% of all the food on the planet is grown. These are threatening major crises for you in the course of your life. And the rise of a national security state that you see kind of going on out of the corner of your eye, with the passage of things like the Patriot Act, now the passage of the National Security Act, and the National Defense Authorization Act, actually statutorily authorizing the military to arrest you and put you in a military detention facility and not tell your folks or anybody where you are, and you not have any right to an attorney, and they can hold you as long as they want without any right to appear in front of a judge. The fact that you live in a nation state now that has that statute on the books, and it's been sustained by the Federal Court of Appeals in the Second Circuit in New York, one of the more important circuits in the country, along with the D.C. Circuit Court of Appeals and the Ninth Circuit Court of Appeals here on the West Coast. This is extremely important. And the fact that you have the president of the American Association of Political Science, Samuel P. Huntington, telling you that in fact he believes that it's inevitable that the United States and the members of this new Northern Industrial Alliance are going to end up in a major military and economic confrontation with China, in your lifetimes, is the type of a crisis that I'm suggesting is going to require radical action on your part. Radical, again, the Latin root of it being radicus, which means to get to the very roots of the cause of what the problem is in order to solve it. That you cannot stand by and watch this process happen, and not be prepared to do something about it. Or when you do get ready to do something about it, you don't have the tools available to know what to do. And what I'm saying to you is that your knowledge of the Constitution of the United States and the underlying ethos of natural law that undergirds its formation and interpretation is going to be an extraordinarily powerful and important instrument for you to have knowledge of. If you are in fact going to move into action to help do something to stop these major crises from manifesting. So that's the context in which I want to talk about this. So what I want to do now is I want to direct our attention to the issue of the natural law philosophy. Again, as I said, I pointed out, and I've done it, I think it's probably fair to say ad nauseum by now, that I've pointed out repeatedly where this resides in the context of all of the different issues that you're going to have tossed up in front of you during the course of your education. That this particular grid, if I can find it, if I haven't lost it here. I think you're saved from me showing it to you one more time. You are. That the bottom line is you see it in its larger context now, but what I want to do is I want to now focus down and turn our attention to this. So the question that would immediately arise is, what are the answers that are provided to the four basic, there it is right there. This is the larger context, that's why I couldn't find it. This is, as I say, even though this is the one thing we're going to be focusing on, and it's in the context of this larger panoply of information that is going to be given to you as a student in your college and graduate school experience, this is the one I want you to focus on for this course. And I want you to start thinking about now what are the answers to these four pillar questions that are provided by adherence to this particular worldview. Okay? And here's the answer to that. The cosmological question that we've talked about before. The cosmological question of how this entire universe came into being, the major adherents to this particular worldview maintain that, as far as they can tell, that it has simply always been here. Okay, is it backwards? Oh, okay. Always been here. Yes, always been there. So that and now you have your ancient Greeks looking at this particular worldview, and they're saying that, look, one thing that we're able to tell is that the universe exists here. We're in it. We know that there have been people in it before that are our ancient relatives, and we have a reason to believe that there are going to be people in this world that are going to be our children and grandchildren, etc. They have absorbed the reality that there is an algorithm that they've been able to discern through history and through the recorded history that they know of that allows them to believe that they exist here in the universe, and that they don't believe that all of this is some kind of mirage. They don't believe that, in fact, there's nothing really here, that they're just living in a dream world of some sort. They believe that it's real. They tend to, in that sense, be phenomenologists. They believe that these are real phenomenon that they're exposed to. And that one of the radical things that they came to understand back in ancient Greece is that they somehow became aware of the fact that the entire material of which the universe is made up is all the same. The materials that exist here on our planet probably exist out among the stars, and that they believed that these stars were in these, they actually believed that they were in these kind of concentric circles that surrounded the Earth. They did believe experientially that the Earth was in the center of all of this, and that their cosmology was that the cosmos had always existed here. And so that was their cosmological view. Now, teleologically, it doesn't appear from the inspection of their writings that they had any particular position on whether it was expanding or contracting. But they did have a very, very clear assumption that all of it was bonded together into one unified harmonic whole. And it was uniform among the thinking of these people. These are when you get into the actual looking at the writings of these people, you come to discover that we're dealing with, for example, Pythagoras that I pointed out. The pre-Socratic Stoics had a more what they call emanationist view of things. That they were what they actually refer to as the word for it is a let me see that it's not one that you run into very often, but it's a panentheism. Panentheism, you see it right up here. The panentheists were emanationists, the pre-Stoics, or the Stoics, or the pre-Socratics. They actually believed that somehow their cosmology was the seventh paradigm people, that in fact the material universe had been enfolded into being out of this infinite and eternal sea of consciousness that I talked to you about. But the sixth paradigm, Pythagoreans, didn't take any such position. They didn't take any position with regard to what was going on outside of the physical parameters of the universe. They just believed that the universe was here, that it was all bonded together into one radical whole. That these people were the original, what they refer to, this is an important term for you in this is they were radical monists. That the universe was one monad, or unified entity, and that everything inside the universe all related to each other in a very systematic manner, and so that there was a predictable relationship everything had. Yes?
Earlier in the course we were talking about how scientists were saying one of the biggest discoveries they've made was that aspects of monism have been discovered or have been more proven, and I was actually going to ask you how closely you think that this discovery relates to this worldview, kind of like how the early atomists were kind of close to chemistry, not really.
Actually, one of the things that we're a little ahead of ourselves, but the question is, what degree of comportment do we find in the latest discoveries that are being made in the realm of quantum physics with some of the intuitive assumptions that were made by the Pythagoreans? This is a very important question because there's a book called The Tao of Physics, actually, that was written by Fritz Capra. Fritz Capra wrote a book called The Tao of Physics, and it's probably one of the most simple expositions of the basic proposition that there was an extraordinary degree of comportment between what's being discovered in the realm of quantum physics and the early intuitions of the Pythagoreans. And the Pythagoreans, as I say, they didn't postulate any particular premise about what was going on outside of the physical parameters of the universe. They just believed that the physical universe was made up of the sum total of all of the atoms. And they believed that everything was made up of atoms, including people. And so that they had so their teleology was one that was a static teleology. That in fact the universe kind of stayed in the way it was. They could tell that the stars were going around the earth, as they believed, and that the moon was going around the earth, and that they believed the earth was in the center of it all. But to that extent, the actual universe itself as an entity, what things were going on inside of it, but they didn't take any position as to what was going on outside of it. And in that sense, it distinguishes them from the emanationists or the panentheists, okay? And it also differentiated them from the second paradigm dialecticians down here. They didn't take a position that it was in fact oscillating, and they didn't take the position of the radical materials that it was somehow just going to expand and disintegrate into nothing. They took the position that it existed and that it would always exist, and it basically always has existed. And that they postulated a whole set of premises about the internal relationship of things inside. And what they did is they actually projected out into the universe outside of the planet the same kind of basic elements as existed on the planet. And they had water, and wind, and fire. There were certain kind of intense phenomenological experiences that they encountered here on our planet, and they assumed that these same elements existed in all of the rest of the universe. And so therefore they began to formulate an entire philosophy that suggested, very importantly, that all of these relationships that existed inside the physical universe could be discerned by human beings through adequate observation and dialogue and sharing of ideas and observations with each other. And then they formulated this extraordinarily important premise. That is that if in fact we could discern the patterns within which all of these different nodules of material in the universe were relating with each other, we could discern laws. That there were laws, principles that were operational, governing the relationship that these bodies had to each other. And that if we could, as human beings, comport our conduct in harmony with those same laws, that this would naturally lead to our happiness, that we would be in sync with all of the natural laws that are functioning in the universe. The classic example that's given of it is that if you in fact wanted to build a sandcastle on the beach, and you built it and you went away and you came back the next day and it was gone, and you built it back up again, and you leave that night, you come back the next day and it's gone again, that you can either keep doing that forever and be continually frustrated about the permanence of your castle, or you could actually stay there and observe it and see that the tide is rising. And the tide is rising and washing away your castle, and so that you can either build it out of something that isn't going to get washed away, or you can build it further inland. But the bottom line is that if you are conducting yourself with a set of expectations that are inconsistent with the functioning of the natural laws in the universe, you are going to be frustrated. But what they're suggesting is that your frustration is solvable. That you can eliminate your frustration by familiarizing yourself in greater detail with the laws of the universe and going to greater lengths to comport your conduct in harmony with them. And that is the basic, simple assumption that the Pythagoreans had. And that's why Pythagoras spent as much time as he did trying to figure out what the kind of physical relationships were that actually manifested between and among disparate points in the universe, in different confluences of mass and energy.
Yeah, I don't want to confuse your metaphor, so I was just a little thrown off by, I guess, the example that if you build a sandcastle and it keeps getting washed away, that you can comport your actions in accordance with natural law by building a sandcastle that won't get washed away.
Build it somewhere where it's not going to the waves aren't going to come and get it.
Right, okay, I guess that makes more sense. I was thinking more like, it sounded sort of like you were proposing that there were ways to use human capacities, right, beyond animal capacities, right, the reason in building things and the sort of all these things that make us human to sort of circumvent the way that nature is. Like,
no.
That would be...
Yeah, no, you just actually build the castle somewhere where the waves aren't going to get it. It's more simple. Yeah.
I guess it's just kind of an extension of my other question, which is like I kind of wanted to ask about the idea of like faith, like practical faith, right? Like so, for cosmological understandings and teleological understandings and epistemological understandings, and even ontological, which I guess we could kind of make a little less of an argument. I feel like there's a certain amount of faith you have to have in those understandings to really like bring them to fruition. And I was thinking like when you're thinking of the postmodernist view, where any system or any answer that you come to can just be deconstructed by 1,000 questions. Like I feel like that's on the. I just wanted to ask this again, like don't you think that's more on the right side, like authoritarianism and fundamentalism, because, or definitely authoritarianism in my view, because if you're not taking, especially like nowadays, if you're not taking a stance, if you're never given an answer to the question at hand, which is like how are we going to solve this crisis, then your political adversaries, even if you think you're like progressive or liberal or utopian on the left, like you're still going to be working for them because they want you to not be on either side. So if you're a postmodernist, doesn't that mean that like it might be? I'm asking like this is my understanding. Like doesn't that make you on the right because you're working for a social order that's already going towards the right?
Well, if you're inviting me to criticize postmodernism again, I must say I do not think that I would take the position that postmodernists are right-wing, because even though, as you point out, to eschew any answer and to seek to disassemble anybody else's answers that could be set forth as an antipode to some fascist or authoritarian oligarchy that wants to run things, it could be perceived as not only dysfunctional, but in fact as being an ally of that oligarchy. Now that could be true. I don't believe that that's the motive of the postmodernists, because most of the postmodernists are writing in support of feminism, against racism. What they're pointing out is that the artificial constructs that were constructed by the authorities down through the ages that justified treating women as chattel and black people as mere possessions of like cattle, that whatever that affirmative construct was predicated upon a leap of faith, if you will, as to what the answers to those pillar questions were, and they got them wrong. Okay, and so even when they were pontificating in the Constitution about all men are created equal, they didn't allow black people to vote, or they didn't allow Native American people to be citizens. You know, so that whatever the construct was that they had, that what the postmodernists are pointing out is that it's extremely dangerous to become motivated, predicated upon your set of assumptions, and conduct yourself as though they're true without being circumspect in understanding that this is a conditional set of assumptions that you're making to generate practical solutions. And so that when people start to protest these, rather than digging in and asserting in apodictic or declarative terms the truth of what you're saying, when you yourself know that it's not certain, that there's some sort of a process short of existentialism that you have to undertake to listen to the criticisms that are being made and stay open to that. And the danger, which will be repeated over and over again, is that the adherents to these particular worldviews don't listen. They don't listen to others because they can see how constructive following their beliefs can be. And even if there are some costs entailed, those are usually entailed to others. And they just foist those costs onto others. And so that it's up to those others to mobilize, and that the postmodernists are, for the most part, championing those others that have been excluded from the decision-making processes down through the past. So that as much as I like to criticize postmodernism, I wouldn't lay that one on them. Yes, Sophia?
Well, but aren't postmodernism and existentialism, I may be misunderstanding postmodernism, but postmodernism and existentialism are, from what I've heard or read, pretty closely akin to one another, and there is some relation between them. So an existentialism, as you say, is a little bit more on the right.
Well, I would say this. I mean, I've noticed the same thing that you have. That in talking to kind of a rampant postmodernists, they tend to say a lot of things that sound very existential, except less optimistic. And that, so I would say this: that an existentialist looks back into history and notes historical events and attempts to discern some sort of patterns. I've said before, some sort of algorithm of relationships and historical events and actions. And then what they do is they turn and they project that into the future. And they believe that if they comport their conduct in accordance with that same algorithm, they'll be able to predict what the consequences are going to be. And what that does is it lends a certain amount of predictability and expectations, etc. The reality is that a postmodernist would say that engaging in any type of activity which is an attempt to project out into the future a set of rules and norms which are going to bind the conduct of others, is in and of itself inappropriate. And so that I would suggest that postmodernists are much more akin to true anarchists than they are to existentialists. Existentialists are different. Existentialists are constantly questing for some type of meaning, even in the face of intellectual meaninglessness. And so they're trying to construct some sort of meaning by an exercise of will, and then comporting their conduct and their expectations in accordance with it. And whereas an anarchist is saying a lot of things very much like the postmodernists do. They're saying that, look, to invest the collective or the state with power is almost always a bad idea, because they will always misuse it. And they will abuse the individual, and certain oligarchies will arise and seize power over the tools of the state, the engine of the state, and they will abuse it for their own self-interest. And while historically that tends to be true, the fact of the matter is that I don't believe that either anarchism or postmodernism is in fact the answer. I think that it's an important consideration. So I think that having postmodernists, at least one postmodernist, usually no more than that, if you can help it, but if you have one postmodernist at the table, and that he or she is speaking up coherently from the postmodernist deconstructionist point of view, that it will be the type of temporizing force that is helpful and healthy for any type of discussion of any particular worldview. So that's what I would say. I would say that the postmodernists are more like anarchists than they are existentialists, I think, in my opinion.
So basically, the people I've debated who claim to be postmodernists are postmodernists expressing poorly phrased views that come off as existentialism because they've received little actual training in postmodernism.
Well, I'm not looking to try to equip you with more positions you can take against them.
Sorry.
I'm just saying.
That came off as sounding much nastier than I meant.
No. Okay.
I'm just
No.
basically, what I was attempting to say there, I apologize,
No.
is basically that postmodernism, what it looks like depends a lot on how you phrase it, and it can look more like existentialism, even though philosophically it really isn't.
Well, the fundamental problem that postmodernists have is that it ain't a worldview.
Point.
That's the problem. So even an existentialist has the capacity to resort to certain kind of intense answers to things that they're providing. They provide answers to the four pillar questions for a functional purpose, but they don't deceive themselves into believing it's true. They do it for functional purposes. But a postmodernist will refrain from providing any answers to it at all. And that's different because that, in a sense, disempowers them to do anything other than to disassemble everybody else's affirmative propositions. And so that they have this entire, I don't know if you've ever heard, there's a thing called the College de Pataphysics they call it, and that the postmodernists gather there with the existentialists, I might add, in Paris every year. Jean-Paul Sartre was a grand satrap in the College de Pataphysique. And what they will do is they will challenge people around the world to send to them any type of affirmative postulate regarding truth of any kind. And then they will pick it, and then they will undertake the process of completely deconstructing it. Whether it's 100 questions or less, it takes to actually deconstruct it. And they'll say, see, your proposition rests upon some fundamental premise that you have no capacity whatsoever to prove. And so therefore it's nothing but a hypothesis. Okay, but you had a question.
I was just going to say that I'm skeptical of conflating postmodernists with anarchists simply because anarchists are their ideology is dissolving hierarchy as opposed to like just having no ideology at all. I mean, it might be devoid of dogma, but there is an ethic and an order to it, just not a hierarchical one. So I'm just skeptical of conflating the two together, anarchy or anarchism
And postmodernism. Now, what I was suggesting in response to Sophia's question is that in my opinion, the postmodernists have more in common with anarchists than they really do with right-wing fascists. And even the abandoning the field in the face of fascism or authoritarianism or some sort of oligarchy, while you could, in fact, if you think hard enough about it, perceive that as being an ally of theirs unconsciously in some way, I'm not inclined to do that. I think it's just a lack of reflection on the part of the postmodernists.
I'm sorry for opening this can of worms.
Don't worry, no. This is important because these are the very ideas that we're dealing with in the course. And what I hope to be able to do is to be able to show you that as an historical matter, the adherence to this natural law worldview, this view of eschewing any kind of postulate with regard to what's going on outside of the physical boundaries of the physical universe, but postulating that there are laws and phenomenological relationships that can be discerned functioning inside the boundaries of the universe that can be used as reference for good and bad, for right and wrong, harmonious or disharmonious, is in fact the overarching gift that has been presented to the culture by adherents to the natural law worldview. And that they historically have utilized these thoughts and ideas to flesh out full constitutions. And that's what our Constitution is all about. It's rooted in that exact set of premises. Okay? So there were some other questions. I don't want to stifle anybody's questions. Yes?
I don't want to open up another can of worms, but where does nihilism fit into this spectrum? Is it under existentialism?
No. Nihilism is actually here, the first paradigm. It's chaos. That actual chaos reigns. That there's no right or wrong. Your view of what's right is no more good than someone else's view of it, and basically there's no fundamental distinction between it and wrong, and that's just nihilistic, and so that they engage in, as you will note, the constant questing after a short-term pleasure, in the minimalization of pain, and that is the mode of ethical reasoning that basically motivates the nihilist, and that they end up becoming, in their higher form, almost an Epicurean, is that all they can seek out is temporal sensory pleasures, in avoiding pain. Okay, so that's the, okay, yes?
Just on that note, I'm sort of curious as to why that fits in on the right side of the spectrum, on the conservative side of the spectrum. It seems, at least in the modern political context, to be really contrary to representation of even radical conservatism.
What I want you to start to do in the course is don't confuse conservatism with being authoritarian. A conservative is a reactionary. There's reactionaries, and then there's conservatives, and then there are authoritarians. And I'm just suggesting that if you come to appreciate the nuances of difference between them, indeed the categorical differences in their belief systems, they're all on the right side of the political spectrum, but they're not the same.
But how could a nihilist be authoritarian?
A nihilist could be authoritarian because they don't believe that there's anything of any value in the whole world other than their own pleasure and their own control over everything, because that's what nihilism leads to, is that they don't have any type of, that's assuming that they haven't abandoned all motive to get out of bed in the morning. You know, that they believe that they get up and they can quell that overarching anxiety about being alienated beneath the stars and cast into an unfriendly world by pleasure.
Right. It seems like maybe just a little bit broad of a category, because Epicurus certainly wasn't a nihilist, and atheists by definition aren't really nihilists, since they're cementing themselves into a belief system. It just seems strange to sort of lump them all together like that.
No, and there's no doubt at all, that's a good point. There's no doubt at all that in attempting to set up categories like this to be meaningful and to be of some assistance, that one has to be constantly alert to places where you think there are inconsistencies in this. What we're trying to do is trying to track what the thinking is of the. I'm not having us be subversive necessarily at Harvard University, but the fact of the matter is I know what it is that they're teaching people there, and that they all have this sense of entitlement that they can take these beliefs and come out into the world and go operational with them. And I'm trying to just prepare you to be able to understand what their thinking is, and so that every person who's an atheist is not necessarily absolutely a person who is going to be a nihilist. For example, you see agnosticism, but see, agnosticism is different than atheism. Okay, and the scientific logical positivists are just agnostics. That they're saying, well, conceivably something could be going on that we haven't discovered yet, that we haven't picked it up on our microscopes yet or our telescopes, and haven't been able to weigh it yet. But I'm not closing the door to something like that possibly being true. But an atheist, a dyed-in-the-wool atheist, and that's why, for example, you get like Ayn Rand, etc., who is a devout atheist and a radical materialist and selfish person in advocating entire social forms that are rooted in selfishness. And at best making passes suggesting that somehow it may trickle down to be of benefit to the paysan, but it's not very convincing. Yes?
I'm sorry we keep jumping around on the subject, but I guess that's what we're doing right now. I wanted to hear you go a bit more in depth in this connection to the chakra colors. It's still a bit weird to me on like where the links are coming from. Is it that people that exhibit this worldview tend to have that aura be stronger with them, or that they tend to exhibit the characteristics associated with that chakra?
Mm-hmm. This is the chakra question.
Is it all, connected together?
No, here's what it is that one of the challenges in attempting to import concepts that have arisen in Eastern culture, in a mystical culture of ineffability, into the Western culture that is kind of radically materialist and intellectual is a challenge. But one of the things that you will note is that the qualities of character that have been associated in the Eastern traditions, Hindu and Buddhist traditions, with different chakra centers. There are, Elizabeth Bruyere, I think her name is Elizabeth, but Bruyere has a book called Wheels of Light, and there you can find a number. In fact, I have a whole shelf full of them, different books on this issue of the chakra and the chakra system. And what they do is they began asserting that particular people who had certain types of characteristics and acted out in certain types of ways, that the Hindus began to suggest that they were out in a particular center. That there are, as I just touched on briefly, that there are particular frequencies of vibration, the energy fields. These are ganglia. These are gatherings of neurons that are inside the human body, and that they're ganglia. There are centers of them, and that what they've discovered is that they give off the interference pattern that is set up among the different synapses and ganglia, set up an energy field that tends to be a coherent energy field in a given locus of the body. And that it has a particular frequency, a vibrational frequency, that particular bundle of energy, and that it actually has a particular rate of rotation, and it actually has a particular angle to the ecliptic, and that they've done lots and lots of studies about it in various Hindu medicine and Buddhist medicine, etc. And they've determined that if in fact a person, if the vibrational frequencies that are being emitted from the centers are within a given parameter, then the people are in balance. But if one of them is hyperactive in giving out super different vibrational frequencies than it's supposed to be, or it's tipped off the ecliptic in a particular way, or it's rotating in a way that is not, quote, healthy, all they've done is they've experientially discerned certain types of conduct that people engage in that have that particular phenomenon going on. And so they've developed an entire science around this over the years. And what this is doing is attempting to correlate those classic patterns of conduct with the chakra system, primarily because some of the great adepts are arguing that all of this talk about political philosophy and different political theories and stuff, that there is a completely unconscious phenomenological causation for people to gravitate toward those particular worldviews, because in fact there's a certain phenomenon going on in their physiology that causes this to happen. Now this is I guess you could say analogous to another forbidden subject in the academy, and that is astrology, of whether or not people who are born at a particular point in the year, at a particular place of longitude and latitude, can be understood to be likely to display certain types of character. And that's just a fact question. And the radical scientific logical positivist community that tends to dominate the academy is emphatic about the fact that that's not to be talked about. You know, that you can't talk about that stuff, because if that's true, why then there's some whole different kind of worldview functioning, different than the scientific logical positive worldview that we want you to understand. You know, that there's a particular brand of Kool-Aid that you're supposed to be drinking at the academy, and that is the fourth paradigm, a scientific logical positivist agnosticism. And that's why if you're asked in your concluding exam, leaving the academy, and they say, what is your religious opinion? You say, hey, I'm agnostic. You know, I've made it. I studied everything I'm supposed to do, and I'm agnostic. And they'll check the box, and you can leave and go out into the world. You know, so that what I'm saying is that the academy has all kinds of strictures, giving them the benefit of the doubt. What they're trying to do is they're trying to get you trained up so that when you come out of the academy, you can get a job, you know, and you can work and you can contribute to the overall structure that is being advocated by those who finance the university. Okay, and that's just the way it is. And so what we're trying to do is help train you to push back against that a little bit, not to decrease the probabilities of your getting a job, but to actually have you use this period of time at the academy to really learn, to really find out what the body of knowledge is that exists in the world, and get to actually explore it yourself without being intimidated by the scientific, logical, positivist, a fourth paradigm, a rational worldview. Okay, because basically you can say to yourself, like they said in the fight game. Remember, the Brad Pitt said to the guy, he says, "How's that working for you?" You know, because you look around and you see how it's functioning right now, and it ain't all that good. Okay, I want to get all the students now. Okay, Sophia, that's all right. No, wait, I'll come right back to you. Yes. What's your name? I forgot your name.
Thomas.
Thomas. Yes, Thomas.
I was just thinking about William Blake, where he would fit into the spectrum.
Well, if you ask Andrew, who is a big Blakean, he's kind of a really kind of a strange fellow. You would think from as much as Andrew talks about him that he would be kind of this existentialist or something, but he certainly is not. He's a radical theist, you know, that probably of a seventh paradigm variety, in that he's constantly into having these apocalyptic visions, and in drawing them out. And in writing poetry from those are very intense experiences he's having. There's no doubt about that. Now, I don't know if there may be laudanum involved, like there were with Samuel Taylor Coleridge, or other types of hallucinogens.
Isn't that an attack on the person?
Pardon? No, not at all. Not if they have good dope. No, if this is what I'm saying, you know, that the fact that a person, you know, does laudanum or a peyote, or for example, what's his head, Aldous Huxley in The Gates of Perception, you know, it's not the doors of perception. The fact that they have some kind of experiential insight, tutored, if you will, by some sort of natural chemical or something, as long as they don't become addicted and they become dysfunctional about the whole thing, if they attempt to share whatever the kind of extraordinary experiences that they had in some sort of linear way of articulating it, that can millions of people throughout the world read Blake and get transported basically by some of his poetry and supplemented by his carvings and stuff like that. These are extraordinary visions and stuff that he had. You could tell that they were powerfully shot through with all kinds of Catholic, Christian imagery, and also pantheistic kind of imagery. So that I would say that Blake, if you had to put him in one of these places, is a seventh paradigm, probably pantheist, but he trips on over into the deistic or theistic vision because he has all kinds of manifestations of the great Godhead, the great male being, you know? Yes?
Yeah, just for an example of someone like Drake, if he's moving people through their own belief systems and kind of having that like transformational artistic experience, wouldn't he be the eighth paradigm?
Well, eighth paradigm, we haven't even talked about that yet. The eighth paradigm is one that we'll address sort of toward the end of the course. But what I want to do is I want to stay focused on the 7 of them that have actually been developed at Harvard University, et cetera, that they work with for the most part. And then we'll deal with that, but I've already hinted that the eighth paradigm worldview is one that is still sort of beyond the event horizon right now, and will probably come upon us, you know, after there's contact with an extraterrestrial civilization, and we really start to become dislocated from the apex of the pyramid of biological evolution, and deceiving ourselves into thinking that we're the most highly evolved sentient being in the universe, because there are almost certainly others. Okay, so let's just before I call on any of we're getting set to go over to the other building that we have now. So I want to break into start to ask lots of questions. So I want us to go over there now. Let's go now, and then think about your questions on the way over, and then we'll do those when we get there. Okay?
Professor, here's the sign.
Oh,
You want it or do you want me?
it goes to Toby.